Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all for joining us today for this live stream event. My name is Rebecca, and I'm the event planner of Microsoft Reactor New York. Before we begin, I would like to quickly review two items. Our code of conduct. So Microsoft Reactor seeks to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. We encourage engagement in the chat, but please be mindful of your commentary. Remain on topic and keep it professional. And then our guidelines. So this event is recorded. It will be available on our Microsoft Reactor YouTube channel within the next 48 hours or so. So you can find it on demand if you're not able to stay for the entirety of the session. If you have questions, and this is your first time joining us, for YouTube, just note that you need to have an account to interact in the chat, and that is the way to communicate with us. So please set that up if you haven't done so already. And otherwise, yeah, just drop your comments and questions over there in the chat. Let us know where you're joining from, how the weather is, anything you want to share with us as well. Closed captioning should be available. If you just go to the bottom of the stream, there should be a CC icon for YouTube, so just check that out. Which brings us to today's session. The Reactor is joined again by Jenn and Skyler from Microsoft for a continuation of their last session, which was building a web API with Azure Functions and Node.js. So in today's session, the workshop will be using that API to display data in a web page and build the funkiest web UI. This session will run for approximately 60 minutes with time for questions throughout. And if you have not done so already, I'm going to share the screen again, the link in the chat as well to check in and get some resources that will be helpful for this session. All right, at this time, I'm going to bring up our guests for today. Welcome, Jenn. Welcome, Skyler. How you guys doing?
Pretty good.
Yeah, not too bad.
Yeah. So awesome. Wednesday, so we're halfway through the week. Or more than halfway through now, right?
Almost there.
Yeah. We're almost there. So, hey, we've got some shout outs already. Someone's in Southern California. Welcome, Eric.
Sunny
it's freezing in New York. I'm wearing a sweater right now. It dropped down to 50 degrees here, so.
Yeah, it's in Seattle too. It's definitely fall for us.
Yeah, so again, welcome. We're looking forward to tonight's session. I guess I'll pass it over to you, Jenn, and let you get started.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks, guys. So I'm just going to go through like a brief history of website development or websites in general before Skyler kind of jumps into the technical side of things and walking through creating a React website or using our API. So I didn't realize this, but 1969 was when the internet was born. I mean, that seems like a long time ago, but it was, I know it was CERN, which was like that, they have the Hadron Collider over in Europe somewhere. And it was just internet, basically. It's like what we call like a local area network now. And then in 1990, they launched HTML. So if we think about web pages today, HTML is like the core of everything, but for HTML to come out and having the first web page, and I'll show the first web page that was actually launched in 1996, that came out of the emergence of table tags, which is always, I think, if anyone's been developing web pages, tables are, it's a love-hate relationship at times with it, but it's the building blocks of all websites that we have out there. Everything's in columns or tables, keeps it nice and orderly and stuff. In 1996, CSS was released, so that allows you to do styling. I do have to say, this kind of ages me, but my very first CSS and HTML class was like in 1999. And there was no like Bootstrap, which is what came out in 2011 down the way. You had to put everything in style guides or put in a CSS spread style sheet. And I think it was super basic. I wasn't doing anything fancy. I was just doing different colors, different font sizes. I think I did some classes in IDs, but yeah. So 2009, Node.js was released. I started working with Node in 2016. That was my very first time touching it. So it'd been out for a few times. Node's kind of been like the main framework that's kind of built out all of it from JavaScript. And now there's other frameworks out there, which we're going to talk about. React is what we're going to be using today. There's also like Vue.js, AngularJS, many different JavaScript frameworks. Then 2011, Bootstrap was released. That was from Twitter. Twitter created this awesome framework that made it easy to be able to just drop in a couple classes so that you didn't have to go and customize all your different types of styling. You can say like, button and then big, and then you say like it could be alert, which then I think it made it red or like orange, a different color, so that it was a preset thing. So you could just reuse. It's like you're reusing a function or a class, so you didn't have to like keep rebuilding stuff or do inline styling, which then you would have to, if you want to change the font size across the board, you would have to go to each different tag and update the style. In 2013, React was released. That was the very first version of it. I think we're on React. Skyler, do you know what version of React we're on? I think it's 4, 5.
I have no idea.
They all kind of blend together, but like every time they release a new version, it's like, oh, there's some really cool new things that are coming out with it. And then in 2016, that's when Azure Functions, our favorite service, at least one of my favorite services, was released. Was launched, not released, I guess. And then last year is when Static Web Apps was launched. So it was a very brand new service that was there to help people create pages and make it more out of the box, a lot less of having to like build out a framework. You can just kind of deploy things, and hopefully we'll be able to get to the point where we can deploy the web page today, but we don't want to rush things or like miss over some details. So we might have to extend this session to the next one, but that's okay. We like to share and talk through things. Okay, let's see. Okay, so just an example of web pages back then. So 1996, the very first web page is kind of text hyperlinks. Not very much stuff. It's at the time that was cutting edge. Like that was so cool to be able to see something and then like actually pull something up. Well, this is also back in the day when it was dial-up. If anyone knows about modems and the sound that it makes, and someone picking up the phone and breaking your connection, and you're going, why'd you do that? But yeah, that was back in 1996, and now in 2021, you got web pages that are dynamic. They have motions on it. Some of them are just like pieces of art to me. The GitHub page is actually one of my favorite ones. They have the lines. I don't have a GIF for this, but like the lines around it, like move around and showing what people are doing real time. So it's taking data from what people are doing, community on GitHub, and then showing it real time. So it's kind of a mind blowing. Like that's what, 25 years or so? Is it 25? Yeah, about 25 years, I think. Mm-hmm. It's come a long way. It's pretty crazy. And then with web development, there's always like discussion between client side versus server side. I just wanted to touch on this really briefly to just say that they are two different parts of it, but you don't have to choose one or the other. There's reasons why you might use client side versus server side. It depends on what you're trying to do. So if you're trying to load a bunch of data, like it's going to do a lot of processing, a lot of calculations, you probably might do it on the back end and then load it, push it to the front end. But if you're just going to load a page where someone's going to click through like a front door page where you're clicking and do a wayfinder to somewhere else, it doesn't have to do too many different scripts, too many different functions. Like it's fairly basic functionality. You can do a client side and that'll just load the page really quick, and you don't have to compile something back end and send it over. Because each time you make a call, if you have a back server side one, there's a latency between when you hit the button and when it does something or loads a new page. Though this day and age, like internet's so quick anyways that you don't really notice it, but sometimes you might. But yeah. And then the last part I talk about, okay, so there's different frameworks to choose from when building websites. You have JavaScript, PHP, Python, Ruby, Java, and .NET are the most popular languages to use it. I'm a JavaScript person. I love Node. I've been getting more into React. I haven't touched as much as recently as I had liked to. So I'm probably going to be asking Skyler quite a few questions to go, oh, okay, yeah, I remember that. PHP was one of the first frameworks I did. It was CodeIgniter was a really neat one that I used. WordPress is, I know Skyler and I were discussing this, it's a CMS, but it's also kind of a framework because you can do a lot of customization and build out different scripts and have it do different things. I think Skyler, you described it pretty well yesterday. You said there was like,
I mean, well, technically it's a content management system. I mean, it's so ubiquitous and so many websites are powered by WordPress still to this day. And it's customizability just kind of, it changed the game in a lot of ways and made it really accessible for people to do that kind of stuff. So, and
it's open source. So like, it's not something that you have to go buy. People are still creating plugins and different things you can do with it. I have a WordPress site. So it's still around. Then Python, there's Django's, I think, probably the most popular Python framework. Flask is pretty popular as well, but I think Django's probably the most popular for web site stuff. Then .NET, ASP.NET, probably one of the most popular ones out there as well, especially for C# developers. People love it. I mean, ASP and ASP.NET have been around for as long as I can remember. And Microsoft has been creating websites left and right too, especially around SharePoint. Like everything they do now, web is all ASP.NET, C#. Java is becoming really big too with Spring Cloud. And then Ruby on Rails. I always liked the name Ruby on Rails. I've never actually developed anything Ruby. Have you? Skyler, have you touched Ruby at all?
Yes, I have actually, but it's been a really, really long time.
Yeah. And then, of course, React is, I made React's logo a bit bigger because that's what we're working on today. But there's a lot of different frameworks. And one's not better than the other. So I'm not saying like you should choose one or the other. It's like do what works for you. But try them out. It's like each of them have their own little quirks and their benefits. And sometimes some of them are a little more tough, but it's worth trying on, just experiencing the different ones. And then just kind of rounds out your experience too. Cool. All right. I guess I'll hand it over to you, Skyler. Just kind of outline, if you don't mind, outline what we're doing, just so that people can follow along and see where we're at.
I can definitely do that. Thank you very much, Jen. All right. So let's see. Perfect. There we go. Cool. As a side note, just as kind of a random thing, we're getting a really weird weather pattern here in Seattle called a baroclinic leaf. Did you hear about this, Jen? It's supposed to just like soak us. It's going to be insane, apparently. I heard about it this morning, but has a really
someone
cool...
was mentioning that down the hall. I was like, what? Like flooding or something?
Something like that, but I thought it had like the coolest name for a weather pattern I'd ever heard. So, okay,
it's
cool.
Like the heat dome.
Oh, that's true. Although the heat dome was kind of miserable, so I don't really want to relive that experience. I don't know. Maybe you liked it, but it wasn't my cup of tea. Okay, so just a quick thing here. My camera's over here, my monitor's over here, so I will be trying to speak to the camera as much as I can, so I can stare directly into your soul, but I will be kind of staring over at this monitor while we talk through this. So I'll make this a bit bigger. But before we go into some of the actual implementation and whatnot, I do want to go over a bit of an outline of what we're going to be doing here today. So as was mentioned before, this is the second episode of kind of the Funkiest blank or the Funkiest API blank series. In episode 1, we used Azure Functions to build out a really basic HTTP API that just created a record in a Cosmos DB database and updated that record. I'm just going to briefly go back into that code. We are going to revisit this code a little bit more later on in this, assuming that we have time. But I do want to kind of just refresh people on what this API did, and so we have context on how we're going to shift this API a little bit down the road. So with that said, let me go ahead and bring up VS Code over here really quick. 1 second. Let's get this guy up here.
And if the screen's a bit smaller, the font's a little small, just put a comment in and we can increase it a bit.
Yes, that is a good call out. Okay, so just really quickly, don't need to memorize all this, anything like that. Just kind of refreshing us here. So we use Azure Functions to create 2 API routes, an API route to create a new score in a Cosmos DB database, and an API route down here to update that score in the Cosmos DB database. We did this using the Cosmos DB SDK within Azure Functions as opposed to using something like an output binding. That's what all this fun kind of configuration details up here are. Again, like I said, not going to go through the kind of like finer details here about this piece. Hopefully you had a chance to watch the follow-up episode. If not, I will explain this a bit more in detail later on. But really simple, only around 40 lines of code to do this kind of updating the value inside the Cosmos DB database and creating the actual record to store that value to begin with. So nothing crazy. For anybody who's paying attention, you might, and is already familiar with Azure Functions and the VS Code environment, you might notice that there is an extra route in here called getScore, but that we'll be speaking to in a little bit as well. I did cheat a little bit and create some of these things ahead of time in order for us to do this a bit quicker. Cool. Okay, so with that said, we are going to start from the static web apps context, and then we are going to slowly add functionality as we go. And so I want to quickly show what we are actually driving towards is this. And I'm not going to spoil too much. I'm not going to poke behind the scenes, but I did want to show kind of what this looks like. This is the app that we will be hopefully creating today in the next 45 minutes. That is going to be incredibly ambitious, but we shall try. It is backed
Can you zoom
by,
in a little bit on that page?
yes.
Sorry. There you go.
It is backed by a Cosmos DB database. It leverages the API from the previous episode, and it is a React app that is hosted on static web apps. So a bunch of really exciting things. Pretty stoked on this one. We can go ahead and flip into this thing. We are going to be following along with some of the documentation that exists in this space, hopefully as much as we can, although I will tell you that there were gaps in the documentation that I found when going through this. In fact, there is a key step missing in this quick start that I found yesterday that I escalated over to one of the product managers, and we just fixed it. And it was pushed very quickly to production. So this session is already paying dividends. So thanks for being here and wanting to see this, because it's already helping make our experience better. Cool. Okay. So if you're not familiar with Azure Static Web Apps, it is a way to host a static site. You may have heard of things like Netlify, or Gatsby is a very popular framework. Also, another name for these kinds of things are static site generators, flat file generators. Github Pages is another really common place to host these kinds of sites. But what this really means is that it's just a site that is effectively crunched down to HTML and JS and is all running kind of on the client side. Now, the cool part about this is that while you have all this code running on the client side, you can still have the client be making calls out to APIs. So your front end is super fast. It's all flat files. It's very performant. And then you can do all these fun little API stuff by, having these routes built over in Azure Functions or something akin to that, which is kind of the goal here, right? We're going to combine Azure Static Web Apps with Azure Functions. So let's just do it. Let's just go ahead and get started with this thing and start following this tutorial and see how far we get. All right. So building your first static site with Azure Static Web Apps. Looks like I already have a GitHub account. Great. Already have an Azure account. I got Visual Studio Code installed. I did cheat again from the second episode. I did install the Static Web Apps extension for VS Code. If you haven't done that yet and you're interested in following along, you can do that now. Just takes like 30 seconds to do. So the first step it's going to ask us to do is to create a repository. It looks like you can select which framework you want to use. They have support for, it looks like 3 right now, as well as no framework. I'm going to be using React. So let's go ahead and follow this step to create a template repository for static web apps. So let's click into that. All right, it's taking me over to GitHub. We're going to call this the Funkiest API UI Live. We're going to create the repository from the templates. And it's generating the repository right now. So the cool part about this is that when I initially looked into this, I was thinking, oh, let's use Create React App, which is a kind of a very popular repository. It's more of a tool now, but it used to be a repository that you could clone and get started really quickly with some pre-existing tooling for React, which made life a lot simpler. Well, this is actually based off of Create React App. It was bootstrapped with Create React App, so kudos to the Azure Static Web Apps team. This is a great place to start from when you're getting started. So it looks like it's done provisioning. I'm going to go ahead and copy the GitHub repo URL to clone it to my local environment, and then we're going to work from there. So let's go back over here.
I think the Create React app was my first one too. The very first app I created on React was using that.
It is a great. It was a great repository back in the day and a great tool. This is going to be probably really small, and it's just making it larger. But let's just do that. Okay. So I'm just going into my terminal window here. I do have, I think I have a. Oh, that's not what it's called. Let's see. Ignore that. I'm looking for my. Where are you? Funkiest API. Maybe it's called the Funkiest API. Hold on. See the Funkiest API. Okay, that's the API. Funkiest API UI. Funkiest UI. Oh my goodness. Sorry, 1 second. This is just showing how organized I am. Clearly.
I think it's the same for most of us. I always mean to go back and like clean up my files, but yeah, I probably have a million screenshots on my saved on my take up space on my drive, which I probably should delete.
Yeah, you'd think that would be a good thing to do. My goodness, hold on. This is the drive version. Sorry, funkiest, yeah, _UI. The funkiest API.
So this is a good learning lesson. Always like use the same naming format. So syntax. So if you remember, if you do dashes or underscores, it's like saying tabs or spaces. I like to do dashes in my names of things.
Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and grab this repo. Okay, cool. So, all right, we have the Funkiest API UI live. This is the repository that I just grabbed. Let's go ahead and go into it. Okay, cool. So we can see that we have some scaffolding from this repository. I'm going to go ahead and open this in VS Code using my nice little terminal shortcut, which is code dot. But of course, you could open this in VS Code any way you want. That was just a folder. All right, so let's kick that back. Okay, cool. So now what we have is our React app that is scaffolded, that is ready to go and be deployed to Azure Static Web Apps with an asterisk, actually. There's an asterisk here, and this is the thing that I ran into the other day. This is where we're going to be working from within this repository. Once you have this cloned and available to go, you can just start immediately kind of plinking away at it and playing at it. But the first thing I want to do is actually deploy this repository to Static Web Apps so we can ensure that everything is working. I like to do things very iteratively in stages. So I'm going to go down to the Azure Functions extension. And you can see that I have the Functions extension installed right here. It says fu ... And then I have, yeah, no, it's not a great abbreviation there. And then I have Static Web Apps down here, which is I already installed the extension. Here's the caveat here. So before you try to deploy this repository to Static Web Apps, there's actually a step that you need to do. And what you need to do is run two things, actually. You need to first install all of the node modules that are in the package.json file, otherwise it's going to get mad at you. So what this is doing is it's just installing the node modules from package.json into your local directory. This just takes a second to go through, do all that fun stuff. It's a prerequisite before we get to the actual thing that I was talking about before. I wonder how much more I can talk before I run out of things to say, and this will hopefully finish by the time I finish.
Well, I can ask you a question. I can ask you like, so why did we pick React for this one? Like, why not use just Node, straight up Node, or Angular, or some other ones?
Well, I've never used Angular before. No, but I mean, so aside from the fact that I've never used Angular before, React is just a very contemporary framework, right? I mean, you have something like Vue.js, which is in a similar vein to React, which has been getting some notoriety, and a couple of other frameworks that are kind of popping out there. As I mentioned before, things like Gatsby are also getting very popular. But React is just a really robust, popular framework that is very performant. It's very well supported. You know, it's just a great choice. And for this particular app, we did want to be doing refreshing of the UI in kind of real time so we could show interactivity, which is what React is really good for, right? It helps you refresh the DOM, refresh basically the web page without having to go through all the kind of hoops that jQuery or something akin to that in the past would kind of make you go through.
Reloading the whole document. I mean, that's why it's called React, because it's reacting to a change.
It is reactive. This is true. Okay, cool. So we installed our node modules. Now this is the step that was missing from the docs. So what you need to do is do an Npm Run Build, which is going to create the build folder, which is effectively your compiled files, right? It's the flat files that are compiled from the source code that we're going to be writing in the React app itself. If you don't do this, it will fail when you try to deploy to Azure Static Web Apps, as it is looking for that directory. So it's going to go through and just create this build folder for us, and then we can deploy this to Static Web Apps and check and make sure that everything is as we expect it to be, hopefully. Yeah, it was a bit of a surprise when I found out about this. But luckily, there was a really great blog post written on this topic that went over exactly how to remedy this issue. So kudos to our community for writing and helping our people figure these things out.
Yeah, totally.
Cool. All right, so we got the build folder here, as we can see. That's great. Now we're going to go ahead and create a new static web app. So I'm going to go down here to the extension. I'm going to hit the little plus button. And this is going to be called the Funkiest API UI Live-1, just in case there's a conflict. We'll do West US 2. We'll be choosing React for our build preset because we are using React. It wants to input the location of your application code. That's just going to be at the root in this case. And it's going to autofill in that it wants a build folder. And if you don't have that folder, it gets very angry at you. So we'll go ahead and slam that one over there. And it is down here actually telling us that it's creating the application. So we're going to watch this actually happen in real time in GitHub. So it actually just sent over effectively a push over to our GitHub repository. And now it is going through the process of actually using GitHub Actions to deploy the static web apps. And we can just watch this kind of happen in real time. So it went and set up the job. And it's going to go through all these build steps, which do take a second to do. This will be one of the last times that we sit here and watch these things configure. But I think it's really helpful to kind of see how these things are working through the system and getting a full understanding. The way that static web apps works is that once this is all configured, in order to make changes to your application, all you have and deploy them live, all you have to do is just do a push, just push your commit to your GitHub repository, and it will kick off this build step, and then it will send those changes live to your application. So once you have this all good and working and happy, it's a really awesome development process. It's actually my preferred development workflow. So looks like everything is happy right now. Looks like we didn't. Yeah. Okay. Detected the application. Awesome. All right, it's doing some stuff here. We should see a message here in just a minute that says that our application has been provisioned and is live in Azure. And we shall see how long it takes us to get there. Oh, let's see here. Yep, all those good things.
Wait, so this is a website, or what are we looking at the moment?
This is GitHub. This is GitHub.com. So this is GitHub. Yeah, this is GitHub Actions. So basically, I clicked into the actual build process so we can kind of see it, how it's working.
Oh, I didn't realize it's GitHub Actions. That's cool.
Yep, it's all powered by GitHub Actions, which is pretty darn cool. So you can see that it just finished the upload, which means it ran the build there, and now we have the website. So if we click into this, we can actually see that the boilerplate React app that we downloaded before is now up and alive on Azure Static Web Apps. And now if we make changes to that app, I know, it's great, right? Now if we make changes to that app, they will, and then we push them, they will be reflected. But we're going to do that all the way at the end. So just wanted to kind of illustrate how that works end to end, prove that that this repository actually worked, made sure there were no gotchas. Now we can go modify it locally to our heart's content and get this thing going. So I'm going to go ahead and close out of this.
I think that's always the toughest part, just getting that first part. Like, does my stuff even run? Like, regardless if I make modifications, like, can I even get it to run and start up?
Yes, exactly.
If you can do that, you're okay.
Right, exactly. Like if we go make modifications to this before testing that out, and then I run into this whole issue with not having the build folder, or it ends up being like, where's the problem? Is it in my code? Is it in configuration? Let's just knock that configuration piece out of the way. Cool. So as I mentioned before, we get a bunch of fun stuff here because this is based on Create React app. But one of the most fun things we get is that we can just use hot reloading, which means that once we change the code over here in one place, the app will automatically refresh and show that change that we made, which is really, really nice. It is going to take a second for it to start up because my machine has been very slow lately. I'm not sure why, but it is a great, great feature. Yep. I've already have some stuff. Okay, perfect. Let's let this thing load for a second. Let's pull back up the console. And we will hit up against that error message, which I've already gotten many times before. And there's our application. Cool. So what I'm going to do is, because I want to see this happening over here, and hopefully we won't have to see the console too much, but if we have an error, we'll have to flip over to it. But I do want to see the application as I'm making modifications to it. So let's put this up over here. Put that down over right there. Make this a little bit smaller. Okay. I am finicky. Okay, so 1 second here. Let's move this down here so we have a good workspace to work from. Close that. Okay, cool. All right, let's get cracking. Let's pull that browser back up though. All right, cool. So, oh, it's not gonna like that. I need to make this smaller. Hold on. There we go. All right, cool. So if you've made it here and you're following along, great. So as I mentioned before, we can actually make changes here, and they will be reflected over here in the browser just by doing a save on the file. So we'll be kind of saving as we go along. But let's go ahead and get started with the React piece of this and see how far we get. So the first thing that we're going to do is already done for us, which is importing the React from React. That's great. That's just a kind of a necessary step. So we will be using what has become the more dominant way of developing in React, which are functional components and React hooks. If you go to the official React documentation, you may run across things called classes. Classes are a totally fine way to use React. It's, you know, you can use functional components, React hooks alongside classes in React, but the community has been converging towards using React hooks and functional components more than class-based components. So that is why we are using this, because we want to teach the most contemporary technologies. So to use these hooks, we need to import a few special methods from the React library, namely useEffect and useState. So we grab those. And then also we do have an index.css file down here. So when we want to do some styling, we'll go ahead and grab the index.css file too. So we can just have it in place. Okay, so I am going to get rid of this initial boilerplate here. So we're just going to go ahead and kill it and add in some boilerplate for add in our code for ourselves. So the first thing we'll do is create a functional component called app. This is going to be where we spend the vast majority of our time. This is basically the core component. We have effectively one main component and then one functional component, although this is a functional component, so I don't want to confuse people, but you can kind of think of this as the container for our application. So after that, let's go ahead, and I like to always add the kind of like the return statements. So if you're not familiar with React, the return statement is where you write the kind of the unholy combination of HTML and JavaScript that is JSX that allows us to render data within this kind of HTML context. So we'll go ahead and just be like, do a little bit of that. And let's go ahead and save. And we can see that over here, which is really small, I'll make this bigger, that we actually got rid of that other boilerplate. And now we have this thing that says hello. Cool.
Can you say hello, Skyler?
Can it say hello, Skyler?
Yeah, let's see. See it say hello, Skyler.
Skyler?
Okay,
not that amazing. Just some.
And you didn't have to refresh. You didn't have to refresh that page.
No, I didn't have to refresh. Yeah, it's just doing it just all as this. Yeah, so really, really tight development loop when you're developing locally, which is awesome. All right, so let's get into the kind of the React-y things. So the first thing we're going to do with this functional component is add a bit of a initial state to it. So we do that by from the functional component and React hooks methodology by creating a constant, doing a deconstruction, and then using this special method called useState. So as I mentioned before, useState is a special method which allows us to set the state within our React components. In this case, if you're not familiar with React at all or front-end development at all, the state refers to basically the data that's within that client-side application. So that could be form fields, it could be button clicks, radio buttons, just whatever is basically being displayed on that component. It can be stored as client-side state. It really just varies on the, per application where you want to store, what state you want to store and where you want to store state. In this case, if we remember back to our the application that I showed before, which I wonder if I still have that kicking around somewhere. Let's see. Yeah, here it is. So if you remember before, we only have one piece of state in this application, which is this value here, right? It's 5. This is literally coming from the database. This is the only thing that changes, right? So as you decrement it or increment it, it changes as well in time with the application. So there's only one dynamic piece of data. Also, you're seeing the numbers go crazy because of race conditions. Like if I hit this a lot, the functions will try to overwrite each other. That's just kind of a gotcha of our approach right now. There are ways to handle that. But I do want to call it out that this is effectively hitting up against our API endpoint. So the behavior can look very strange as it tries to flip through things.
And we can do a whole session on that later too, because the whole state and that timing stuff is it's important, but it's pretty complicated. And you have to,
yes.
We probably talk about it for hours, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. So may need to manage that state, and making sure you don't have conflicts like that is it's a topic unto itself. So let's go ahead and flip back over to the VS Code context, get this back up. Okay, so explain this a little bit further, because this is actually, it looks simple, it's actually kind of complex. So useState is a special method within React. These two pieces here inside this array, this first piece, value, is a parameter that is going to hold our state, meaning it's going to hold that number that you saw before, okay? So that is where that gets stored. Set value is nothing, it's nothing special. Like the name of this could be anything. It could be, set my name or something like that. We actually establish the name of this. And what set value does is it's a method that is called to store data into value. This becomes very important later on. So this is a method that stores data into this parameter. And this whole statement is kind of the linkage that allows you to do that. So really important to keep that in mind as we continue to drill into this. Cool. So I'm going to keep going. If that's a bizarre concept to your brain, I understand, but we'll try to make this more concrete as we go along. So now what we have is a place to store state. So that means that, hey, we have a place to put this client side, but how do we actually get that thing? And we're going to use that through our we're going to do that through our next special method here called useEffect. Yay. So let me just set that up. So useEffect is the only other complicated or complicated-ish kind of React method that we're going to be using. useEffect, actually, hold on a second. Let me make sure that I have 1 second here. I want to pass this in so I don't forget. Okay, I'll explain what that did in a second. useEffect is basically within this method, you can put code, right? You put whatever code you want in there, and when the browser loads, or when the component mounts, which is kind of a React-y way of saying this, but when the browser loads, code within the useEffect method will get called. In this case, it's going to get called because we are passing in this empty array here, which tells the method, hey, if this array is empty, just go ahead and call useEffect right away, and then execute the code that's in that block. In another one of the useEffect blocks that we're going to be creating, this will be replaced with something else, but we won't go there right now. So for these purposes, all you need to know is that this code block is going to execute once when the browser is loaded. So what we want to do is actually get the initial state out of the database using our APIs that we created before. However, we are missing kind of a core API to do this, right? Like if we go back and look at this, where was it? If we go back and look at this, we have this number here, right? But we created, in the last episode, we created 2 API endpoints, create new score and update score, but we don't have anything called get score, which just gets the value out of the database, which is an important differentiation to have, right? You want to have these kinds of things all separated into their discrete endpoints. So again, for the sake of time, I went ahead and created that, here we go. I went ahead and created that function for us, which is right here. This is just get score. It's within the same function app that we created before. All I did was just create another function. And honestly, I took the vast majority of the logic from update score and just copy and pasted it in here. But we can go through this just step by step, just as a refresher. So really quickly, up here is our configuration block. This is, again, not the safest way to do this, right? We're storing the key in plain text in the code. Not a great thing necessarily to do right here. This is our database ID. This is our container ID. This refers to the Cosmos DB configuration details. We initialize our client. Then we get access to the database. We get access to the container using the Cosmos DB SDK. We write a query to grab that data from the database. We specify the name of the record that we want. In this case, it's called Funkiest API score. We actually pass that in with our post request. And then it goes and it queries using that query. It fetches all of the results. And then we just do some assigning of those results because it comes back through in a JSON array. And then we just make sure we get all the requisite values out. And so we can see that the last thing that we grab is score value. This is literally just the score or the numeric value that we want. And then we pass that into the response from the function. So the function gets called, it gets requested, it does some stuff, fetches the data, and then the response that comes back out is going to be sent to the client being the React app in this case.
So really quick, is a function like similar to a method? So if am I doing like a get, or am I actually?
Yeah. So in this case, this function is going to it's an API endpoint, it's an HTTP function that responds to a GET request from some sort of a client requesting against that function. Does that make sense? So it'd
be like the URL/get score.
Yes,
right?
Exactly. Yep, exactly. So this could be like skylarscoolapi.com/get score or whatever would be the API endpoint. Okay. Yep, exactly. And so I can actually, what we'll do is we will start debugging, assuming everything goes according to plan. This is where things can get a little fun sometimes.
A little funky.
Woo. So we'll go ahead and start debugging because we're going to start doing this from the local context first. Okay, cool. So what we can see here is that locally we have 3 API endpoints, the 2 that we created before, and then the one new one that I created ahead of time. Called getScore, which just grabs the data from the database and returns it back. Okay, cool. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this URL because this is the thing that we're going to use to get that data and initialize that value. So I'm going to grab this the URL from this from my local function app, and I'm going to go ahead and bring back up all of my. There we go. Bring back up all my fun stuff. Let's see, and I am going to use a native method for JavaScript called fetch to do an API, to basically do an HTTP request against this URL. We are also going to pass in the name of the record that we want. This is as I said before, this is the name of the record inside Cosmos DB. So Funkiest API score. All right. And then we're going to do comma. And so, okay, so I know we have limited space here, so I apologize. It's going to get a little crunchy in terms of the zoom. So now I'm going to specify some parameters. We're going to do a get request. We're going to set a header. Specifically, we want the content type to come back as JSON. And then we are going to start doing our promise chains to receive the response.
Skyler, can you make the font a little bit bigger?
Yes. Better?
Maybe we should just go full screen and cut out the video. It might be better for view-wise too.
Okay, let's see. Here, I can make this even possibly bigger.
Yeah.
Is that big enough?
Yeah, that should be. I think that should be big enough. And then if you move over the Explorer, minimize Explorer a little bit.
Oh, like, yes.
Yeah, just drag that bar over. They'll give you a little more screen space or browser window space, I guess you can say.
There we go.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
Perfect. Okay, cool. Okay, hopefully people can see that now. Cool. Okay. So so we have our fetch method here, and I can actually see it in its entirety. We're fetching against the kind of the local function app. We're doing a get method. We have our application JSON. So first thing we're doing is we're returning the response as JSON. Next thing we're doing is we're going to do something with that response. So we're going to grab the response, and we are going to so now we have it in the JSON form. Great. That means we have access to the data. Now we get into the fun part of, sorry, one second here. Yes, now we get into the fun part of actually the Reactisms. So now, as I mentioned before, we have this thing called set value, right? So this is where it comes into play. We got the data, we have access to it now. Now we want to put that data into our state, and we're going to use our set value method. And all we're going to do is just pass in res.data, and this specifically is this is the shape of our data that we got back from the API. So what this actually is, though, is it's just that number, more or less. So we're passing that number into our state, so into this parameter value. And I mean, that's it in terms of like how you set the state in this. But let's actually see if this works, meaning if it compiles. I am going to pull back up the browser while we save this. Let's see, save it there.
So it's data because the response back from the API call is data equals, and then it's like a array, right? I think, or just a number probably. Which is
yeah. So like if we go back over to this, which is super hard to read, let's make that smaller. We can see that what we returned back in the body is data, and the score value, which is just an integer.
Yeah. So you're just saying, give me that data parameter, the parameter called data.
Yep. Exactly. And so then it just puts it in there, just like that. Super simple. But it's the linkages where things get kind of confusing. So this feasibly, let's see, set value res.data value. Let me make sure. So this should have set the data in there, which is good. But we can test this out now by making a reference to the actual value. So let's do this. Let's delete this down here. And let's say the value of my state value is, just make it extra confusing.
Ballet.
Value.
Ballet.
oh, thank you. Typo.
So it passed in the value of 8.
Passed the value of 8. And now, I mean, at this point, this is super simplistic, but what we have done here is we have the function, we have the API running in the function app. We have React, the Reacty way of doing this, meaning we have set the state in React. Value now contains this state. And now every time I refresh, it's actually dynamically pulling that data out of the database. And I'll just show you kind of a really quick hack. So this is Cosmos DB. I'll just refresh really quick before we get into it. I just flipped back over to the Cosmos DB context. This is Cosmos DB within the Azure portal. I wanted to come back here because I wanted to show how we can go into Cosmos DB. This is called Cosmos DB Data Explorer, or just Azure Data Explorer. As I mentioned before, the name of the record in Cosmos DB is Funkiest API score. So this was the record that we found using our API call. This is the score, which we can see is showing up over here as 8. But let's go ahead and just change that ourselves inside the database, just to kind of.
Which we don't recommend doing. Just saying.
We don't recommend doing.
Don't update data in a database directly.
Yes.
Got it.
But this is just for the purposes of just seeing how this works. Let's go ahead and refresh, and we can see that the value was pulled out, right? It's now 150, just by refreshing the page. So, okay, so that is showing kind of the connecting tissue between all these pieces. And if we were actually to flip back over to our function app and look at the debug, which is really hard to see in this, but this is actually showing that we are successfully getting these requests to the API that we have. Okay, cool. So I am going to flip back over into React. Nice, sweet. So we have that number. All right. So that is 1.
So if you deploy the app the way it is right now, will it work?
It will actually, yeah. Well, okay. So it would work if I switched out the URL to this, to the actual
URL. Yeah.
Yeah, to the actual URL. But it would work. We could deploy it right now, and it would work. So in the next 10 minutes, I'm waffling because I'm thinking about what I want to show here. So let me plump for I think I'll do some of the UI functionality and then we'll probably leave it at there for this, for today most likely, but let's go ahead and add a little bit more to the UI to kind of, to flesh this whole application out, and then we'll do the wiring in a future episode. Cool, so.
Yeah. And we knew it was gonna be a lot of info. There's a lot of things to go through and kind of just walk through because we don't want to rush it for everyone and then leave you hanging like, oh, did I miss a step?
Exactly. Exactly. So we have the state stored, we're getting the state, we're storing the state. Let's go ahead and just add some flavor text here. So let's go ahead and add a div down here called app. Let's add an h2, say this is a number, and let's bring our value in there. Close h2, let's see, take this away. Let's add a little bit more information here. We can call this number is from the return data from an API call, and where, sorry, I will not do that. As an aside, while I'm going through and doing this, I am not an expert when it comes to React. In fact, I went to my brother, Alex, who works for a company called Smart Deploy, who uses many different Azure services and is a React expert, and had him help me plumb all of this. So kudos to Alex for really being the hero of today, as my React knowledge was way out of date. And so all these cool hook stuff is coming to you courtesy of my brother. So round of silent applause for Alex and all the help that he's provided thus far.
It's crazy how fast the frameworks change and what people are coming out with.
I know, yeah. Yep, I totally agree. This is a little bit big. Cool, so you can see that we are now kind of dynamically adding some of this stuff. But as we saw before, we had these increment and decrement buttons. So what's cool about React is that it's very composable, right? So you kind of want to write your pieces of UI as kind of discrete elements. And so let's go ahead and create those buttons, but we're not going to just use like a button HTML tag or something. Instead, we're going to write this as a functional React component. And so we're going to create a functional component called button. We're going to return in the same way that we return in these other React components, a bit of HTML or JSX. In this case, we are going to, and I'll explain what this means in a second. We're going to have that as our click handler, and then we're going to pass as props the children, and then that is going to be our button. So this is a functional component, has a props as a parameter. This is a click handler, which means that once there's a specific function we're going to pass in here to do the incrementing and decrementing. We're not going to do that right now, but this is how it gets plumbed together, and it will make more sense in the next session. But what we will do right now is explain props children. So let me show you what the kind of utility of that is. So now that we've created this button, we can do handle click, or actually won't do handle click right now. We can do button. We can call this button decrement. We can create another button. We can call it increment. We can save it. We can go over here, and our buttons now exist. Of course, our buttons don't do anything because there's no functionality plumbed to them, but they exist. And so what this props.children, which is a special kind of element in React, is it basically says, hey, whatever's between this component, between this open tag and this close tag, just pass it as a child. And in this case, it's text, right? Decrement and increment. And this is a way that you can kind of dynamically create buttons, right? We could add another button here called like, hey, Jen, and it's going to pop up a button called Hey, Jen. But notice that we didn't have to actually, change anything over here. We just got to pass in that text to the button itself. So it's a nice way of handling that in order to create kind of better composable buttons. Cool. So
it's really nice. Really easy.
Yeah, it's super easy. So I think we will stop here, but just as a teaser, the next set of things that we're going to create are basically our increment function, our decrement function. Let's see, I think it's just increment and decrement. Oh, and then a way to basically the plumbing the increment and decrement, to our state value. So state value and allowing it to update the value in the database. Whee! Long comments. Let's actually take that thing over here. Okay.
I know we're pretty ambitious for trying to build a whole bunch of things, but I mean, how long did it take you to get to this point? Like you were working on it for.
Yeah, it took me more than a few hours to get through the static web apps piece. It took me probably a whole day just to get all the deployment stuff. The app itself isn't too complicated, but to get all the requisite stuff in place, it took quite a bit of time. It took much longer than this session, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we do have some really cool stuff coming up. There are a few gotchas here. Sorry, I do want to say one thing. If anybody is planning on trying to do this on their own, there is something else you're going to come up against, which is another gotcha that I really quickly want to address this because it's super important. When you're doing a fetch request from a React app, you might run into a CORS issue, a cross-origin resource sharing issue. This is really common in web development. It'll want to deny your request, and you'll be like, why is this happening? Yeah. And so you actually have to enable your function app locally in order to allow it to allow basically a client to make that request. And to do that, you just add in this little blurb here to local.settings.json inside your function app. You just establish what port you want to have it coming in from. This is the port that the function app is running on. And then you can just set it to a wildcard. In this case, this is because we're doing it locally. Don't set this, you don't necessarily
don't
want
set this like in production.
Like it's in production. But locally, you can set this to a wildcard, and this will allow you to make that fetch request from your local box to the function app and plumb those two things together. So really important.
CORS has always been it protects you from pirating or like from people jacking and inserting like code and other sites into your calls. So yes, CORS is a good thing. Don't turn off on your production stuff. Always leave it on unless you know what you're doing some testing temporarily or something.
Yep. Absolutely. Yep. It's a pain when you're doing testing, but it's important when you're in production. Yes. Cool. Yeah. And I think that's it. I think that puts us in a good place to hopefully do a continuation on this. You would be able to deploy this app as it stands now and to kind of add additional value. Jen, do you have any questions or anything on this front? Anything else that's kind of top of mind for you?
It kind of looks like the 1996 app or the webpage because it's just text, right?
Yes. Yeah.
But they didn't have buttons then. So, but yeah, mine's the buttons.
But look how close we're getting, right? I mean, just a few more, a little bit more time, and look at that. And then you could affect the CSS and all that kind of stuff, which is super easy to do. But yeah, we're pretty darn close. So
make it funky.
For sure, yeah. Add some cool colors.
Yeah. Cool.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. I'm gonna pop in now. Give the audience another couple minutes to muse over that and see if any questions come through. I dropped in the chat just our survey. Let us know what you think. There's an opportunity to let us know if you want to see more like this or something similar. You can feel free to drop those comments into the chat if there's things that you want us to put together for you, for the audience to experience. Do feel free to fill out that survey. And if you're joining us for the first time, join our community. The Reactor has its own website, microsoftreactor.com, where you can see all of our regional calendars. We have 11 physical spaces, so we cross-promote sessions throughout multiple time zones. So definitely check that out. If you're on Meetup, find the local Meetup that's closest to you. Right now, most of our sessions are virtual, although in some locations around the world, we are going back to in-person. So feel free to check it out. And as Skyler and Jen mentioned, this was a long kind of program for today, so they're planning to split it up, and hopefully we'll be back. So keep your eye out. I'll share in the comments for anybody registered, any future listings. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
This was fantastic. And thanks to the audience for tuning in.
Yeah, thank you, audience.
Yeah, thank you.
Take care now.